Israel Keyes was born in Richmond, Utah, in January 1978. Raised in a large family with conservative, religious values, Keyes' upbringing was strict and isolated. His family eventually moved to an even more remote location in Colville, Washington, where they lived without running water or electricity, further limiting Keyes' exposure to the outside world. This isolation allowed his dark thoughts to develop, away from the influence of teachers, peers, or authorities who might have noticed warning signs. Keyes' family joined a white supremacist Christian identity church, fostering beliefs that would influence his worldview. While some neighbors described Keyes as a quiet but polite boy, others sensed something darker lurking beneath his calm demeanor. As he grew older, his fascination with violence began to manifest. He was known to torture animals, a classic hallmark of budding serial killers, and his interest in causing harm was unmistakable. During his teenage years, Keyes connected with Chevy Kehoe, a young man who would later become a convicted murderer and white supremacist. The friendship didn't last, but the connection was a disturbing glimpse into the violent, hateful influences that Keyes was exposed to. Keyes joined the U.S. Army in 1998 and served until 2001. He was stationed in Egypt and served in Texas and Fort Lewis, Washington. Fellow soldiers remembered him as an intelligent, well-mannered man who enjoyed drinking and pranks but didn't raise any red flags. The discipline and structure of military life seemed to provide Keyes with a socially acceptable outlet, but this period also sharpened his organizational skills, attention to detail, and patience traits that would serve his dark side. After leaving the Army, Keyes began to embrace his violent desires more openly. Yet he remained meticulous, planning his crimes with precision. He avoided developing a consistent modus operandi, one of the many strategies he used to evade capture. Keyes' primary goal was to continue killing without getting caught, and he took extensive precautions to ensure this. Keyes' life continued in seeming normalcy. He settled in Anchorage, Alaska, where he ran a small construction business. He was seen as a loving father to his daughter and a reliable handyman, blending seamlessly into the community. His double life allowed him to indulge his darkest fantasies without arousing suspicion, and his business gave him the flexibility to travel frequently, a critical component in his plans. One of the most chilling aspects of Keyes' crimes was his preparation. Unlike many serial killers who act on impulse, Keyes took the time to assemble kill kits that he buried across various states. These kits contained weapons, cash, and tools needed to dispose of bodies, allowing him to be ready whenever the opportunity to kill arose. He placed these kits in remote locations, sometimes years in advance, meticulously planning every detail to ensure he left no trace. This unique level of foresight made him a terrifying predator. Keyes didn't rely on chance but rather engineered opportunities to commit murder without leaving a trail. These kits demonstrated Keyes' astonishing patience and his chilling detachment from his crimes. By carefully burying these caches across the country, he eliminated the need to acquire tools near the scene of a crime, avoiding suspicion. This technique also ensured that his killings appeared random, further confusing investigators and allowing him to evade detection for years. Unlike many serial killers who target specific types of victims, Keyes was indiscriminate. He didn't seek out people he knew, nor did he have a preferred type. Instead, he chose his victims based on opportunity, another method that made his crimes difficult to connect. Keyes traveled thousands of miles to kill, sometimes crossing multiple state lines. This transient method, combined with his lack of victim preference, enabled him to kill without establishing any identifiable pattern. He avoided leaving a consistent trail and never killed close to home, always staying several steps ahead of law enforcement. In interviews, Keyes revealed his meticulous planning and chillingly calm approach to murder. He described staking out locations, watching potential victims, and planning his escape routes. He would often spend days or even weeks in the vicinity, ensuring he could commit his crimes with surgical precision. This cold, calculated approach gave him the confidence that he could kill at will, without ever facing consequences. On February 1, 2012, Keyes struck in Anchorage, Alaska, close to home for the first time. He abducted 18-year-old Samantha Koenig, a barista working at a small coffee kiosk. This crime would ultimately lead to his downfall, but it also revealed the disturbing extent of Keyes' cruelty. Keyes approached Koenig at closing time, armed and masked. He forced her into his vehicle and took her to his home, where he bound and assaulted her. Tragically, he killed her the following day. In a calculated move to delay suspicion, Keyes went on a pre-planned cruise with his family, leaving Koenig's body in a shed on his property. Upon his return, he went through a grotesque charade to buy himself more time. He took a photograph of Koenig's body, using makeup to make her appear alive, and held up a recent newspaper beside her, demanding ransom from her family. Keyes made Koenig's death look like a kidnapping, manipulating her family's hopes while attempting to cover his tracks. He used Koenig's ATM card to withdraw money, allowing him to travel freely while further tormenting her family. But this was his first major mistake. Surveillance cameras captured images of Keyes withdrawing funds, giving law enforcement their first concrete lead. Keyes was finally apprehended on March 13, 2012, in Lufkin, Texas, after law enforcement traced his movements through ATM withdrawals. His calm and cooperative demeanor during the arrest was unsettling. Keyes didn't appear nervous or anxious about his capture. Once in custody, he spoke with investigators, but only on his terms. In his interviews with the FBI, Keyes displayed an eerie indifference, almost enjoying the attention as he recounted his crimes. He confessed to at least 8 murders across the U.S., though investigators believe there could be many more victims. Keyes' lack of remorse was chilling. He spoke about his crimes as if discussing mundane tasks, betraying no empathy for his victims or their families. He insisted on controlling the pace of his confession, giving up details slowly and only when it suited him. Keyes' manipulative behavior frustrated investigators, who needed more information to uncover the full scope of his crimes. He admitted to killing people in Washington, New York, and Vermont, among other locations, but refused to disclose all the details. Throughout his confessions, Keyes displayed a sense of pride in his ability to evade capture for so long. He seemed almost amused by the challenge of outsmarting law enforcement, reveling in the mystery he had created. But behind this facade of control, he likely understood that his time was running out. Law enforcement was closing in on the full extent of his horrific acts. In December 2012, while awaiting trial, Keyes took his own life in his jail cell. He left behind a suicide note, a rambling, hate-filled manifesto that failed to provide any closure for the families of his victims. His death meant that the full truth of his crimes might never be known, and the exact number of his victims remains uncertain. The FBI has since spent years investigating potential connections between Keyes and unsolved homicides across the United States. His use of kill kits, his extensive travel, and his ability to blend into society have left authorities with more questions than answers. Keyes' death, while perhaps an escape from justice, also cemented his dark legacy as one of the most enigmatic and terrifying serial killers in American history. Keyes' case continues to haunt investigators and the families of potential victims. His calculated, detached approach to murder set him apart from other killers and left a chilling impact on those who studied his crimes. He was a man who killed purely for the thrill, without a pattern, preference, or clear motive. His ability to evade detection for so long serves as a reminder of the vulnerabilities within the criminal justice system when facing a truly calculating killer. Keyes once told investigators he would have continued killing if he hadn't been caught. His lack of remorse and desire to create chaos underscore the darkness that defined his life. By taking his own life, Keyes robbed his victims' families of the justice they sought, but his crimes have left an indelible mark on the field of criminal psychology. In the end, Israel Keyes stands as a chilling reminder of humanity's darkest potential, a man who lived among us, seemingly ordinary, but harboring a monstrous secret. His meticulous planning, lack of a discernible pattern, and sheer callousness leave us questioning how many more like him could be lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike without warning. One of the most unsettling aspects of Israel Keyes' story was his extraordinary effort to avoid detection. From a young age, Keyes seemed to understand that his dark inclinations would only be possible to indulge if he meticulously planned and kept his double life hidden. This foresight went beyond typical planning. Keyes devised elaborate methods to ensure he stayed ahead of law enforcement. His approach remains a focal point in understanding how he evaded capture for so long. Keyes committed his crimes with what some criminal psychologists would later describe as forensic countermeasures. He used burner phones, wore gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints, and disposed of evidence with caution. He traveled thousands of miles to kill and carefully selected isolated locations where he would leave no witnesses. Additionally, Keyes used rental cars for long-distance travel, avoiding tolls and major highways, and paying with cash to ensure he left no traceable transactions. These methods worked seamlessly, as he avoided any clear connection to his crimes. This planning frustrated investigators, who struggled to find any meaningful leads before his final capture. Keyes' understanding of investigative techniques was evident in his detailed approach, which left almost no trace at his crime scenes. He had developed an unusual awareness of police methods, which kept him elusive. One of the most haunting aspects of the Israel Keyes case is the number of unidentified victims he left in his wake. Although he confessed to at least 8 murders, the exact number of his victims remains unknown, as he often spoke in vague terms, refusing to reveal specific details that could confirm additional cases. In his discussions with the FBI, Keyes admitted that he preferred anonymity for his victims, expressing an eerie satisfaction in knowing that some of them might never be found. Keyes' admissions led investigators to question a long list of missing persons and unsolved murders across multiple states. He hinted that he committed murders in several regions, including Vermont, New York, and Washington, without providing clear details about the victims. This tactic allowed him to maintain control over the investigation even in custody, dangling pieces of information to keep law enforcement engaged without giving them enough to bring closure to families of the missing. To this day, the FBI continues to sift through cold cases and missing person reports to establish connections to Keyes. They've released timelines based on his known travel routes, hoping that someone, somewhere, might recognize a missing loved one who could potentially fit Keyes' elusive patterns. But with his death, the chance to obtain closure for many families may have been buried with him. The mystery surrounding the full extent of his crimes adds another layer of horror to his story, a killer who not only evaded justice, but also left a trail of unsolved cases, causing endless heartache for families who still seek answers. Psychologists and criminologists have studied Keyes' behavior, analyzing his traits in an attempt to understand what drove him to such calculated cruelty. Unlike many serial killers who exhibit early signs of psychopathy or mental illness, Keyes showed an unusual level of control and organization, which set him apart from typical profiles. He didn't suffer from hallucinations or delusions, rather. He was fully aware of his actions, often reveling in his ability to outsmart others. Keyes' personality suggested a mix of traits that might be classified as psychopathic. He was manipulative, cold, and callous, showing no remorse for his victims or their families. But unlike many serial killers who act impulsively or leave clues due to an overwhelming urge to kill, Keyes was unique in his deliberate approach. He controlled his impulses, carefully planning each step and avoiding emotional attachment to any of his actions. Some experts argue that Keyes exhibited a form of self-determined psychopathy, where his intelligence and self-control allowed him to harness his dark desires in a more disciplined way. He managed to live a seemingly ordinary life, hiding his violent tendencies while meticulously crafting his homicidal plans. This duality is what made him so effective at evading capture, as he blended seamlessly into society. Keyes' calm demeanor and calculated decisions prevented him from raising suspicion, allowing him to operate under the radar for years. Keyes had specific rituals and rules for his murders, another indication of his organized approach. He maintained strict guidelines to ensure he minimized the risk of detection, sticking to rules that would reduce his vulnerability. For instance, he never killed close to home. Koenig's abduction was the only exception, and he selected locations far from any familiar ground. This meant his crimes could often be mistaken for isolated incidents, rather than part of a larger pattern. His rules extended to his interactions with law enforcement. Keyes was known to play games with the FBI, controlling the flow of information he provided, sometimes contradicting himself or withholding details that could give agents more insight into his methods. This approach allowed him to retain some sense of power even in captivity, using investigators' questions as an opportunity to mislead them. He seemed to enjoy the intrigue and mystery he created, and this manipulative approach became an extension of his crimes. Keyes also took pride in breaking stereotypes often associated with serial killers. He defied the common psychological markers and modus operandi, viewing himself as superior to those who left patterns or sought attention. To him, remaining unknown and undetected was a victory in itself. This belief in his own skill and intelligence contributed to his sense of invincibility, which was only shattered upon his arrest. Israel Keyes' story continues to resonate, not only because of his crimes but also because of the chilling questions he left behind. His actions forced law enforcement to reevaluate their approach to tracking serial killers, as his nomadic lifestyle and lack of a clear pattern rendered traditional profiling methods less effective. Keyes serves as a grim reminder that there may be other killers out there who can operate under the radar, leaving no obvious trail. In response to Keyes' case, the FBI has focused on improving databases and increasing communication between agencies across state lines. Keyes' cross-country travel and buried kill kits exposed gaps in information sharing that might otherwise have alerted law enforcement to his pattern of behavior sooner. Today, his case is often cited in training programs as an example of how dangerous it can be to rely solely on typical profiling methods when searching for elusive killers. The fear Keyes instilled goes beyond his known crimes. He represents the potential for unseen killers, those who exist without motive, without a recognizable pattern, and who move in the shadows with the sole purpose of killing for thrill. Keyes showed that some killers could hide in plain sight, evading detection for years by maintaining an ordinary exterior. His case challenges the belief that there are warning signs for every killer, a disturbing reminder that some of the darkest individuals might be the ones we least expect. While Keyes' death marked the end of his case, the pain he left behind continues to impact those who encountered his crimes. Families of possible victims remain haunted, searching for answers about their loved ones, wondering if Keyes was responsible for their disappearances. Investigators who worked on the case are also left with the frustration of unresolved mysteries, knowing that they may never learn the true extent of Keyes' actions. Keyes' crimes have also impacted the community of Anchorage, Alaska, and other areas where he may have operated. For some, his story is a reminder of the vulnerability of everyday people to extraordinary, unforeseen dangers. His capture brought temporary relief, but his death prevented true justice from being served. Families, communities, and law enforcement officials are left with the unsettling realization that Keyes robbed them of the opportunity for closure. As time passes, Keyes' case remains a point of analysis and intrigue, with experts, authors, and filmmakers exploring the psychology of his crimes. Each new examination, while helping to understand his motives and methods, often brings fresh questions about the extent of his actions. His case continues to stand as a haunting legacy, a stark example of the capacity for evil that can lurk behind an ordinary facade. The story of Israel Keyes is one of a hidden darkness that spanned years, transcending state lines and defying traditional criminal profiles. Keyes was not motivated by personal vendettas, ideological beliefs, or financial gain. His sole aim was the act of murder itself, a pursuit he orchestrated with alarming precision. His legacy is a chilling reminder of the lengths some individuals will go to fulfill dark desires, undeterred by the possibility of getting caught. Today, the FBI and other agencies continue to study his case, hoping that by understanding his methods, they can prevent others like him from eluding capture. Keyes' crimes have forced law enforcement to confront uncomfortable questions about how such an individual could operate for so long undetected, while blending into the background of society. Keyes' story serves as a warning of humanity's darker potential, revealing how easily evil can wear a mask of normalcy. For those who lived in his shadow, and for those who strive to prevent future tragedies, his case is a grim reminder of the need for vigilance and of the terrifying unknowns that may still lie beyond our understanding.